Next up is Anne Fleming. She has been an avid cyclist since getting her first bike at age 8, a blue CCM from Canadian Tire. She has been a regular commuter since moving downtown in 1990 and remembers the first bike lanes going in on St. George. So, while sad to say goodbye to her 30-year-old Raleigh road bike last year, she has found a new love in her Trek FX3. Anne, welcome to the stage.
Hi everyone, my name is Anne. The theme tonight is limits, and you might hear me use that word once or twice here. It's involving my limits, but the limits of a number of other people and the limits of where you can go on a bicycle. So some of you may know the story of Come From Away, how the people of Newfoundland came together in the wake of the 9/11 terror attacks, how 40 flights were grounded in Gander, in their very small airport, and how over 6,000 people were helped by a town of barely 10,000 people. It was nothing, the people of Gander said later. You would have done the same. But do you know the story of the Sabina flight that happened 50 years earlier? I'm going to rewind a little bit. So 20 years ago, my husband and I went to Newfoundland for an adventure travel trip. The first part was going to be sea kayaking on the coast near St. John's, and the rest was going to be mountain biking. The sea kayaking was great. We got to see whales close up, and we also got to see, I guess, Newfoundlanders close up, and part of the culture there. Now, Newfoundland, as you may know, is basically a big rock in the ocean. And a lot of it is populated by little outports, little fishing ports that aren't connected in any way. So people really rely on their neighbors. And so one of these outports we kayaked into to stay overnight, and our tour guide had forgot his matches, so we couldn't have dinner. But he did knock on one of the doors of the people living there. They drove him into town and let him pick up, all the supplies he needed. And they let us use the tap at the side of their house for cleaning up. So we got a firsthand glimpse of what that supportive society is like. So after the kayaking, we went mountain biking. Now, mountain biking was at the tour guide's shack, hunting shack near Gander. Now, Gander is landlocked. It's inland about 100 kilometers. It's mostly known for aviation and its airport. It was discovered at some point that Gander lies about halfway between New York and London. So it was determined it was going to be like a refueling stop for the early planes that would fly from here to across the Atlantic, because the planes couldn't make it all the way. The first airport was built there in 1935. During the Second World War, over 10,000 flights went through the Gander airport on the way to battle in Europe. There was a boom in aviation post-war. Again, before jets could fly all the way across the ocean, everything stopped in Gander to refuel. Most of the flights made it, some of them didn't. So back to my trip to Gander. Now, in Gander, there's not a lot. There's woods and bog and lakes and rivers. There was a bit of a logging industry that came up. Some roads were built in for the logging. And this is what we went mountain biking on. And if you ever get a chance to go mountain biking there, it's a lot of fun. If you want hills, there are hills. If you want rocks and roots to jump over, rocks and roots to jump over. If you want to see trees, go through mud, bog, it's all there. We had a total blast. One of my personal limits, and I will slide this in here, was this one hill we went up. And this may not be a big deal to a lot of you, but again, this is 20 years ago. I've been up steeper hills, but it was just such a long hill. It was like a mile and a half. It just didn't end. It's like that Poplar Plains where you're like, am I there? No, you're not. And this went on for a very long time. And you're going down and down and down. You're finally in your last gear, and you're like, I have nothing left to give. But this pushed me personally, and that hill I remembered over the last 2 decades as one that I managed to conquer through sheer willpower and endurance, and help me not to give up in other places. But this is not the point of the story. The point of the story is what we saw the next day. Our tour guide took us into the woods. We biked till there were no roads, and we biked until we couldn't ride anymore, and we had to ditch the bikes. I'm getting, okay, so this is us on our way in. That's me on the left. I still own that chamois, by the way. I still fit into that 20 years later. You get an idea, a little bit of the woods around there. Oops, how are we doing here? And that's me and my husband with a friend. Again, with a sense of the woods. So we come to a clearing. And the visibility at this point is not good. And again, if you've been to Newfoundland, you know, with the Atlantic and the wind and the rain blowing in, you can get kind of like foggy, thick weather. The weather at the time, we had little droplets of moisture in the air, and you couldn't really see all that well. It's what the Newfoundlanders call a tick mist. So there was a tick mist that day, and we come into the clearing and you can't see anything, and then the mist starts to lift, and I cannot believe what I'm looking at. It's the carcass of a DC-4. Debris everywhere. This is a cleaned up version of what we saw and a cleaned up version of what was there originally. So what the hell happened? So September 18th, 1946, a Sabina flight from Belgium carrying Belgian diamond merchants leaves London en route to New York. They're scheduled to refuel in Gander. They radio the tower waits for them to come, and they never arrive. They can't see where they're going. They managed to shoot past Gander by 20 miles. By the time they get below the fog to see where they're going, it's too late. You can see right here, they plowed hundreds of yards through the woods until it stops, and they burst into flames. The captain and some of the passengers are ejected so far, they go another 100 yards before slamming into the trees. A bunch of the people are incinerated in their seats. The rest of the survivors crawl to safety and pull the rest out, and then they wait, and their hell was just beginning. They're in the middle of nowhere. Gander's already in the middle of nowhere, they're in the middle of nowhere. It takes an entire day before a reconnaissance plane can find them. And as it's circling around and about to head back to Gander, the pilot notices a couple of guys on the ground. So this is Abbott, Pally, and Bruce Shea. They're a couple of caribou hunters from nearby Glenwood. They look up and they see this plane coming at them, and they're a bit nervous, but then they see that the pilot's waving at them. And he turns the plane around, and they realize he wants them to follow him. So they hike 4 miles through the woods, the heavy forested woods, and they come upon a scene. And it was unbelievable to us, it was devastating to them. They come into the clearing, the plane's still on fire. There are bodies everywhere. The survivors are moaning and crying, and there's the stench of death in the air. They said if they didn't have the trees to hold them up, they would have fallen right down. But they pulled themselves together, and they got to work. Blankets, sleeping bags, they wrapped up the survivors, they made them comfortable, they reassured them, and like good Newfies, they made tea. They built a fire, no kidding. They used 2 bean tins that they had and some loose tea that they brought with them, and 2 cups at a time, they made some tea and served the 18 survivors. And then they sat down to wait. And it wasn't until nightfall that the very first rescuers started to arrive. Dr. Samuel Martin and a few other guys. And how they got in there is even a miracle. They had a float plane come into a nearby lake. They had to raft up the river and then hike into the woods. And you can just imagine what the rescue is going to be like from here. Apparently, this was the biggest rescue thing that had ever happened in Newfoundland at the time. They actually had live radio broadcasts of what was going on. They had to bring in helicopters from New York. And when I say helicopter, bring them in, they had to disassemble them, put them on a cargo plane, bring them up and reassemble them. And the helicopters are just really like tin cans, not unlike the bikes we just saw, but with a rotor on the top. These tiny little things. So the helicopters would come in, they load the people up, 1 or 2 at a time, take them to the float plane, which would take them to Gander. So 2 or 3 days to get everybody out. Everybody's awake for 2 or 3 days. It's complete madness. By the time they're done, they don't have any energy left to, bring the rest of the bodies out, so they bury them on site. And here's a little tidbit I was interested to find. They had a funeral service conducted by a minister, a priest, and a rabbi, but they couldn't land. So they had a plane, a US Army plane, circling overhead to do the service. Yeah, no kidding. And then they took a recording and sent it to the survivors back in Belgium. So, and meanwhile, back in Gander, they have to bring in all the extra medical staff. You have volunteers coming up, and everyone's, again, just coming on like every possible person that can come in, comes in to help out for the next 2 or 3 days. And miraculously, out of the 18 people they pull out, only 1 person dies of their injuries. So again, limits, everybody's working well past their limits, well past what they even think is possible. They've made something possible that was not even possible before. This is amazing. But what about Abbott and Bruce? Or, yeah, what happens to them? Well, they stay overnight after the first rescuers arrive, and then they kind of go home. What happens to them? They told their wives, they told their neighbors, everyone in the neighborhood knew, but they just kind of got on with it. Apparently they had nightmares for years. Like, this was just something that completely shattered them. And while all the other rescuers, the official guys, were recognized, Bruce and Abbott didn't get any recognition until the 90s, but they did finally get a medal from the King of Belgium. So here's a picture of the two hunters. One of them's kind of sitting down here. I don't know. Oh, here's my green thing. Here's one here, and then there's another one standing over here, and then one of the survivors here. And you can just see this giant wooded area here. You can just imagine what this is like. So this is a slightly higher view, and you can see the cemetery. So it's still there. You can go see the site today if you can make your way in. I'm not clear on how clear the logging roads are. It's still pretty, primitive there. If you can, you can take an ATV, or as I like to put it, you can still bicycle your way in. That is, again, one limit to getting in there is having the right way to get in there. And I consider myself very, very lucky. And you'll notice here they put the propeller on a memorial, and people will sign the propeller kind of like a guest book. And I'm pretty sure I ended up doing that as well. And then here's just another view from above. And then here we are posing. I think oops, sorry. This is my husband Michael, and you can see this burnt out section here. And then here's me here, still wearing the chamois, and I think that's breakfast. It was pretty early, pretty amazing though. Yeah, so I'll wrap that up there. Thank goodness for the people of Newfoundland, and again, I feel very privileged to have been part of this. So thanks very much. Questions? If you're interested in more of the story, especially about the two hunters, there's an episode I discovered of CBC's Land and Sea from 1992 with Gordon Pinsent talking about this whole thing, and you get like the video and everything as well, and you get to see the two hunters who were still alive in 1992. Yes.
Did they take you out there to see that? Like, did you know that was your destination on your bike ride, or were you just biking along?
No, our tour guide, the guy who lived there, he lived in St. John's, and he had a a hunting shack in Gander. He knew it was there. He was taking us there, but he didn't tell us until we got there what it was. It was a complete surprise. And it was interesting because he told us the story of the hunters. And when I was Googling this, there was a lot about the rescuers, but almost nothing about them. They'd kind of been forgotten. But that was the one detail that really struck with me. And after the 9/11 Gander thing, I remember that. It's like people just coming out to help. Yeah. There was question? Yes.
So there's still no improved road out there or anything like that?
No. I think for the terms of in terms of logging and sort of getting from east to west, there's like a main highway. But as far as I understand, there's not a lot of roads connecting a lot of Newfoundland still. It's just by sea. So apparently Gander's been a little bit built up since then, but the biggest thing is like the Walmart, right? Still, there's still only 12,000 people there. I saw a hand. Yes, thank you.
And sorry if I missed it, did you guys actually cycle around the island, or did you sort of get to spots and then mountain bike in them?
Yeah, no, we didn't travel by bike. We went in a van with some bikes, and then once we were in Gander, we just kind of made our way around the area. It was just kind of freestyling. It was kind of fun. Yeah. I think definitely going back to Newfoundland and biking around would be an interesting trip. Yeah.
Well, we're sort of considering it at some point in the future.
Yeah. Be sure to stop by Gander.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks very much.